Hey guys, what's up? Today we are going to walk you through how to set up your Carli E-Venture system. This is going to walk through the screen, everything you know about how to set up the different parameters within this system. This is going to be relevant to RAM, Ford, basically anything using the SDI E-Click system, but this is going to be specific to the Carli E-Venture controls on that SDI E-Click. So starting from the top here, we are going to look at the three different driving modes to start. So we have rock crawl, we have on-road, and then we have Baja, or high-speed off-road. When you're deciding between these, this is going to be your base behavior of the shocks. So this is going to control how the shocks respond and how their base feel is going to be. So for rock crawl, what that's basically going to do is pull a lot of the compression damping out of the shocks. They're basically going to be as soft and compliant as possible, which allows the truck to articulate as much as possible. So this is a great mode to be in if you're rock crawling, if you're doing lots of low speed articulation. Currently, we are in the street mode. This is going to be your daily driver setting. So this setting is basically going to have a little bit more compression feel than the off-road rock crawl mode. And the goal of that is to basically stop the truck from rolling, leaning. We're going to get more into the pitch and roll settings later. But this is going to be just a really nice, smooth, compliant ride with a little more control on the body roll of the truck. In Baja mode, you are going to get a much more responsive feel out of the shocks. This is where they're going to quickly ramp up if they sense impacts, if you have input on the truck in terms of steering and braking. This is going to be where they are most responsive, and we're going to have the most compression damping possible to support the weight of the truck should you encounter a hard hit, dip, things like that. So you're going to choose your base setting accordingly. Now, if you tap this bottom button right here, this is going to take you to the menu. So let's go through. Now we've done the mode setting. What I want to show you guys is this screen. So this screen with that little arrow with the shocks is going to show you what the shocks are doing. Now right now the truck is turned off. So each shock is going to be at setting 10. Setting 10 indicates full compression damping. Now as you're driving, depending on your mode, you're going to see these numbers change. This is a screen I personally like to be on while using the system because it's a fun way to see what the system's doing. And keep in mind, the system's acting a lot faster than this screen is displaying, but this is going to give you a good idea of what the system is doing and how it's behaving. Now, these numbers are going to change depending on what your base mode is in. So from before, we're talking about the rock crawl, the street mode, etc., etc. That is going to influence how these numbers behave. So if you are in the rock crawl mode, you're going to see the lowest values here. You're going to see 1, 2, things like that. If you are in the street mode, depending on how you have the street mode set up, again, we're going to get into that, you're going to see these numbers ramp up. Like let's say I turn right really sharp, you're going to see these outside numbers ramp up. The inside ones are going to stay the same. If you brake really hard, you're going to see the front pack up, the rear stay the same, things like that. So these numbers are going to represent what the shocks are actually doing. Now let's say we want to adjust what the shocks are actually doing. That is this indicator. So this is going to be kind of the settings area. So if I click into this, you can control the front, the rear, you can go into Pro, and that's going to allow you to kind of change what the truck is doing. So let's say I go into front. Now this is going to be how the shocks are going to respond. This is going to be independent within each base setting. So right now I'm in street mode. This is going to determine how the shocks feel in street mode. If I go into Baja mode, again, I can control this, and it's going to have a memory for what I'm setting here. So this is going to set my baseline settings for street mode. Now in terms of adjustment, if I go over towards comfort here, and I'm going to use this roller dial on the outside of the screen, that's going to be my adjustment feature for that. So if I'm on comfort, that is basically going to have the shocks be as soft and compliant as possible, and they're not going to ramp up quite as aggressively with an input from braking, with an input from steering, etc., etc. You can control these separately. So base setting would be about halfway. I personally like to leave that right around there. So to go back into settings, what I really like to do is go into this Pro mode. When you're in Pro mode, you now have much more control over how the shocks are responding based on different inputs. So there's pitch, which is how far the truck is leaned forward. There's roll, which is how much the truck is leaning left to right. There's turn, which is how sensitive it is to your actual steering angle. Throttle, brake, and etc. So I really like to personally go through these and fine tune things. Now, for me, I personally really like to have the truck be more sensitive to roll. So for roll sensitivity, which is truck leaning, I like to be up there. And again, this is all in street mode. This is going to change. So like for rock crawl, for example, you'd actually probably want to turn this down so that these shocks aren't firming up there, allowing the truck to articulate as much as possible. But for street driving, I like the truck to stay nice and level. So I'm going to make the roll sensitivity a little bit higher, and I'm going to select OK. I'm going to go back in here into Pro settings, and we're going to go turn. So this is how sensitive it is to your steering wheel input. So again, lean of the truck and steering wheel input are different. Steering wheel input is useful because it's going to allow the shocks to stiffen up before the truck actually starts to lean over. Roll is what's happening once the truck has already leaned. So the turn sensitivity is actually going to be based off the steering wheel angle sensor of the truck. The roll is going to be off the accelerometer, which is mounted in the engine bay of the truck. So for here, I'm going to turn up my turn sensitivity to that. As you can see, there's a lot that you can do with this. So again, within each mode, you can change those things. So if I go into Baja Mode, I can then once again go in and change all of those different features. Now I did brush over this a little bit before, but you'll see there's also settings for braking, there's settings for pitch, etc. So you can change all of this to be how you want. So if you want the truck to really ramp up the front shocks under heavy braking, you can again dial that up. If you want it to be base value, it's going to be halfway. But you can go and do this and fine tune this to all of your different likings. Now, one other mode that's actually really interesting to know about is this rear load mode. So rear load mode is going to allow you to adjust the compression of the shocks in the rear of the truck specifically. This is going to alter the base setting of these shocks. So this isn't how they respond to anything that's going on in the truck. This is going to be their base setting. So let's say I'm towing a really heavy trailer. I've got a really heavy load of gravel in the back, something like that. This is where you're going to want to ramp up the compression damping of the shocks at their base value. So if I turn this to 100, the shock base value in just the rear is going to be significantly higher. This is going to make the rear end of the truck stiffer. So this is going to resist compression movement in the shocks. And this is usually what you want if you are towing heavy. So this is a useful setting. Obviously, you're going to turn this up when you're towing, turn it back when you're done. But that is going to be very useful for you guys that are towing heavy and hauling heavy. Now let's say you've gone in, you've changed all of your settings, and you're very unhappy with how the truck feels, or you just felt like it felt better in the stock settings. You're going to go back into the settings section here. Then you're going to hit this icon, which is the gear and the wrench. And then you're going to go down here to this little recircle or reset icon. Tap that, and it can actually reset all of the stock settings on this unit. So that's going to allow you to, let's say you made a ton of changes and you're unhappy with how the truck feels. This will allow you to kind of reverse that and go back to stock. In this case, I'm happy, so I'm going to hit no. Now, after explaining that, one common question we get is, I've changed the modes in my system, but it doesn't feel any different. One thing that you need to consider is that this system, let's say I'm driving on a totally flat road and changing the different modes, can only make a change if the shock is actually moving, right? So if you're driving down a very flat, smooth road surface, the shock is maybe moving a ½ inch to 3/4 inch. That's not really enough shaft travel to truly make a difference. If you are driving off-road, you're pushing the truck, you're cycling through the full travel of the suspension, you're driving down a mountain road, that is where you're going to feel a really marked difference in the shock. So keep in mind, as you're making these changes, you have to be conscious that the shock has to actually move to feel those changes. So if you're just driving on a flat road and you're changing all the settings and everything feels the same, push the truck a little bit harder. Take it off road, take it to a windy road, and ramp up your roll sensitivity, your steering wheel ankle sensitivity. Slam on the brakes really hard and ramp up your brake sensitivity. Take the truck down a rough section of dirt road in street mode and in Baja mode and feel the difference. That is where you're really going to feel the difference when the shocks are actually moving. There's actually stuff going on with the suspension of the truck. That is where the shocks are really working. If you're just driving down a straight road, you're really not going to feel a difference because the shocks themselves aren't moving enough to really make a felt difference. Now, with that out of the way, one final thing I want to talk about is what's actually happening in the system when you're making these changes. Now, the Carli E-Venture system is going to be taking inputs from multiple aspects of the truck. So there's the accelerometer mounted on the top of the engine bay, but it's also going to be reading off the OBD2 port of the truck. That is going to have steering wheel angle position. It's also going to have throttle, brake position, speed, and a number of other factors. The E-Venture system is then going to interpret all of that data and make a decision on what the shocks need to do. So the accelerometer on top of the engine bay, that can measure if the truck is leaning, if the truck is falling, if it's rising, if it's dropping into a hole. And then the steering angle and stuff is going to allow the shocks to anticipate what's going to happen next with the truck. So if I start to initiate a turn, it can tell how fast I'm initiating that turn and what my degree of angle of steering input is. That will allow the shock to then stiffen up on the opposite side that I'm turning from, which will support the truck and stop it from rolling over. This is hands down the most advanced system ever offered for the HD Ram and Ford truck platforms, and as a result, this is literally going to be one of the best riding systems. Hopefully this helps you guys walk through kind of the basics of how to set this system up, what's needed to kind of fine tune everything. But if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to us, sales@cjcoffroad.com, or give us a call. We would be happy to help figure this out for you and get the system riding how you want.